Wine's troubles continue to mount, while some point to online gambling as a main villain in alcohol's story of 2025 and beyond. But things are never as neat as the narrative suggests. We'll talk about that and course correct some 2025 beer trends. I'm Sightline's Director of Insights, Brian Roth, joined by lead analyst Kate Burnett for this episode of The Gist. And Kate, we're going to start by talking about a annual report that comes out for the wine industry, the Silicon Valley Bank Wine Report, that the last few years has painted a not pretty picture for the world of wine. It has a few main points in terms of what some of these roadblocks are, namely elderly consumers who are drinking a lot of wine are being replaced by younger consumers who do not drink nearly as much wine. The return of its premium, higher priced business is basically not happening. And then off-premise sales overall, as in addition to those premium bottles, basically are not expected to return to flat growth for another 3 to 4 years. This is not a great situation for wineries. This is something that we have covered just recently on Sightlines, where we had a multi-part series going over the problems at hand, but most importantly, using a consumer perspective to kind of give a prescription of what's going on so producers and retailers can think more proactively about it. Let's set the stage from our point of view as you were doing some of the research and analysis of what is actually working for consumers from their point of view. What did you discover that could be used as kind of these key takeaways while the industry is facing these challenges?
Certainly, on a population level, young people are not drinking wine at the rate that older generations were. However, when I spoke to 20 something consumers who were interested in wine to some degree, what I found is that wine is in the mix for them. They like wine. They enjoy drinking wine. And granted, there may be fewer of those young consumers drinking wine, or they are not drinking as much wine as older generations were at their age. But there is still interest. It is in the mix among the alcoholic beverages that they are choosing. However, when I ask them about the aspects of wine that they like, it is not some of the typical focuses for wine marketing historically. So I did not hear much about geography, varietals, exclusivity. I heard a lot about community, flavors, fun, experiences, the sensory and communal aspect of being in wine bars or at wineries. I heard about fun bottles, fun formats, fun flavors, fun experiences. So again, I think this is not necessarily a problem of liquid per se. It's a question of messaging and connection and prioritizing the language that young drinkers are speaking about wine.
There was a great quote that you had from Catherine Fretwell, a 26-year-old who lives in Alabama, who is a self-described wine lover. And Catherine told you that while she likes drier whites, in particular Sauvignon Blanc, that she's not super picky and typically will just, quote, judge a book by its cover and look at a label and decide, that's the one for me today. And reading something like that combined with what we see in the market, this just feels to be true, especially when you and I, the breadth of analysis and insights that we do across alcohol, that the amount of barriers that exist when you look at a wall of any kind of alcoholic beverage is just, they are a lot because you don't know what's what. You don't know what the flavor experience is going to be. So you're trying to match your expectations of the money you're about to spend. And so, I think to people who have been long immersed in the wine industry, the idea of a 20-something choosing a wine bottle solely because the label is attractive to them can be off-putting. But it is also these labels that, from what we hear and see, that, if it is clearly communicating in some fun way flavor expectation or simply just speaking to them in an effective way, like that can be the 3-second decision that has to happen.
Absolutely. And I heard a lot from young drinkers talking about sort of the mood of a wine. Oh, certain whites are kind of back porch sippers, right?
Mhm.
So I think a label helps communicate the occasion, the mood for that wine. And this is something, this isn't reductive. It doesn't mean that these consumers are dumb. It means that they've learned to make an association between perhaps a type of wine and a mood. So Vino Verde is light and refreshing and day drinking, right? Like you think Vino Verde, you think daytime. So they're learning perhaps about varietals down the road, but connected to a specific time and place and mood. And all of that needs to be communicated sort of A1. One of the, for example, kind of case studies that we had for subscribers in this wine series was a wine bar in Chicago called Easy Does It that sells very nice high-end wine through their wine bar and their bottle shop, natural wines, orange wines, fun stuff. And when you look at their wine by the glass menu, these wines are not described by the producer, by the varietal, by the geography, but with names that sort of sound like cocktails. Raspberry Fizz is some kind of a light-bodied rosé, right? Zippy Lemon is maybe a Vino Verde or something like that. And it's just again, communicating the flavor experience, communicating the mood, and not even asking the consumer to pronounce Grenache or Gewürztraminer or whatever. Just
Mm.
giving them an easy way in and an easy call for that wine, and communicating mood and flavor at the same time. It's pretty brilliant in my opinion.
If you are joining us on YouTube on the screen right now, you will see the top 5 drink trends by consumer interest for Gen Z and millennials. These were compiled by Data Central, a market research company. For each Gen Z and millennials, 4 of the top 5 were flavor-focused wines. Wine cocktails, fruit wines, dessert wines, flavored wines, all did very, very well in the top 4. A hard soda was the 5th category for both Gen Z and millennials out of those top 5s. And, again, taking it from a consumer point of view, I would not see this as, insulting, I suppose. Again, going back to maybe like the historic thinking of a Vinter who's looking at this, but rather these are the experiences that these drinkers are getting in every other decision-making process, whether it's an alcoholic beverage or not, that they get to choose and experience flavor in these ways that they're just simply not finding from within wine. And so then all of a sudden there's a barrier that exists where they can't clearly get or understand the experience that they might have with wine. Makes it easy for them to move on to something else.
Yeah, and I think this is an opportunity for wine. Young people are literally saying we are interested in wine in these surveys and conversations with me. Wine should not write them off. They are eager for these experiences with wine. It just has to speak their language.
Here's a broader problem, though, Kate, too, is that, along the time of this Silicon Valley report coming out, as well as our own reporting on Sightlines, Sovos Ship Compliant did their annual direct-to-consumer wine report,
Mhm.
this includes what we would probably classify as the most dedicated wine consumers. They are buying directly from wineries. These are club members who are dedicated to purchasing X number of bottles, maybe on a monthly or quarterly basis. And even those shipments are going downward.
Correct. And with declines even at the very highest end, which has always been kind of the focus for these DTC programs, wines over $100 not showing the growth that they were just a few years ago. And I think this is an interesting problem or dynamic that we see in wine that we perhaps don't see in beer and spirits. Barclay Webster, the VP of Business Development at Free Flow Wines, has mentioned this, that wine spends 80% of its resources on wines that represent less than 20% of volume. Everything you hear is about this you know,
Mm.
high end experiences, um, kind of to the either ignoring or the denigrating of the volume wines that get sold in grocery and liquor stores. Um, it, you don't see that in beer and spirits. Beer spends an enormous amount of time and resources behind the biggest moving brands. So it's just interesting that there's an inverse there in wine, and I think that's just a dynamic to note, and that I thought of as I was looking at this DTC report as well.
The compounding losses via that Sova ship compliant report, after a high in 2021, the volume of shipments were minus 10% 22, minus 7% 23, minus 10% in 24. So this is just a continuous downward trend. And Kate, as you had mentioned as well, some of those losses are the worst for more expensive brands too. They're all negative in the double digits. So if it's a case where if you're looking to determine, how better to communicate to consumers, whether you are making wine or wine-based products, Sightlines.news is where you'll find our multi-part series breaking down the who, what, where, when, and why to address these challenges that so many are facing. Kate, speaking of challenges the alcohol industry is facing, a lot of talk in the month of January about how gambling is impacting alcohol spend. And most notably among young men. We had a video report on Sightlines titled Gambling's Impact on Discretionary Spending Distracts from the Larger Shift in Drinker Demographics. There's a lot of kind of hand waving or finger wagging, I should say, toward, Gen Z spending money elsewhere than on alcohol like we all should have. And it made me think a lot about how millennials were responsible for killing all sorts of industries. If you just Google and type in millennials killing, you will see headlines for the likes of Reader's Digest, CNN, wherever you may turn, about all the things that millennials killed because they were choosing to spend their time elsewhere. Just want to set the baseline here that when we're talking about who is potentially most impacted, young men, why is this a reason why we should not, see the sky falling?
Sure. So sports gambling is right now in the U.S. Dominated by young men who are declining in importance as alcohol consumers. Since seemingly time immemorial, they have been the focus of, and especially beer, but all beverage alcohol category marketing, right? Is you got to get this elusive 21 to 35-year-old male drinker. They are declining as a proportion of alcohol drinkers. Drinkers turning 21 today are more likely to be women than men. Women are drinking at higher rates among young women than men are. Also, Gen Z will be majority non-white in just a couple years. The biggest decrease in daily drinking since 2019 comes from these 18 to 35-year-old white men, while non-white women have been ascendant as alcohol consumers. So even if we took this gambling competition argument on face, which I think you and I jury feels very out on that as well, but even if we accepted that, this is no longer the core demographic for beverage alcohol, and will continue to fade in relevance as non-white women ascend in the coming years.
Up on the screen on YouTube, we are highlighting a few of the things currently, quote unquote, preventing Gen Z from spending money the way older people would like them to on alcohol. Just to put it in context, when we talk about gambling, of course, if we are worrying about just one individual segment of declining alcohol consumers, young men, in particular young white men, that's missing the forest for the trees. Just for context too, Gen Z is spending about $178 per month on pets and pet needs. That's anywhere from $32 more than what millennials spend, up to almost $90 for baby boomers. Gen Z last year spent an average of $342 on beauty products. That's the highest amount spent since 2018, when they spent $368 annually. And then, Kate, we've even talked about this in terms of video games. This is a space that is certainly closer to parity in terms of men and women, girls and boys who play. However, this is a category where America spent almost $60 billion on video games in 2024. That's a little over double of what they spent in 2014. And if we're trying to put a blame on things where younger people maybe have more time and energy to spend on something, the idea that gambling, just like any of these things, pets, beauty products, whatever, is going to so drastically disrupt spending habits just seems like, you're kind of trying to pick out a villain that is far bigger than what these challenges may actually be?
The average sports bettor in the US spends about $100 a month on sports betting. I mean, that's half as much as Gen Z spends on pets. It's what? It's one more dinner out a month. I mean, this is not a earth-shattering shift in how people are living. And I mean, really unaddressed in this is whether betting on sports actually makes you more likely to be a sports viewer and consumer of, live sports, which we know are huge alcohol drinking occasions. There is academic research that strongly suggests that people who bet on sports watch live sports, consume media about sports. And again, those are all alcohol, very historic alcohol drinking occasions. So I fail to really see how younger people being interested in betting on sports, watching sports, being engaged with sports is somehow a existential threat to alcohol spending.
Yeah, all of this also ignores the idea of whether or not people are winning or even breaking in what their bets may be. That research that you mentioned coming from Managing Sports and Leisure, academic journal, quoting here from the research study, Sports Betting on Sports Consumers' Behavioral Intention. Researchers wrote that the results showed sports betting involvement positively affects fans' flow experience and satisfaction, which in turn increases their behavioral intentions regarding game attendance in media consumption. So the idea that, people may be with friends or strangers at a bar, it may be a bar dedicated to promote potential online gambling. FanDuel, DraftKings certainly have partnerships and their own drinking establishments as well. So, I don't think we can lose sight of all the other factors, even if we want to talk about something like housing costs, which we have extensively on Sightlines, in the way that whether you're living by yourself or in multi-generational homes, the way that you are thinking about your budgeting and how you're spending your money, there are just too many factors at play, I think, to point at one individual boogeyman and say something like gambling is an existential crisis for the alcohol industry because young men are gambling increasingly in states where it becomes legal. It is the beginning of 2025. So as we're thinking about these challenges that wine and the broader alcohol category are facing, Kate, we are also facing loads of trend stories. What's going to be on trend? What's going to matter most?
Prediction time.
Here at Sightlines, we often like to think of ourselves as pretty pragmatic, objective, and data and story driven with the people that we talk to. There are a few items that we have seen come up multiple times through media coverage of what's going to be the hot trends in 2025. Three of them being sustainability in terms of how breweries can use that as a marketing tactic to increase sales, whether it's for an entire brewery or individual brands. The idea of nostalgia or low ABV beers. Kate, let's hit on a few of these real quick just to put in, I think, proper context for the way that, we are seeing things from how we think about these stories and Sightlines. Let's start with sustainability. If you're with us on YouTube, you see a headline from friend of the program, Dave Infante, from VinePair of May 4th, 2023, headline, "Nobody cares about sustainable beer." Kate, through the years of reporting in analysis that we have done, we have not encountered consumers who have made it abundantly clear that they make purchase decisions based on ideas and feelings of sustainability. It may be a part of things that they are aware of, but why, from your perspective, is this a maybe not so trend despite it being brought up so often?
There's a disconnect here between what consumers will say about sustainability. Yes, I would love to support sustainable brands. Sure. Does it determine purchasing decisions, particularly in beverage alcohol? I think you and I say not as a top 5 factor. I think what sustainability can do is, if the consumer is aware of it, can enhance a connection to a brand they already like or be a support for a decision they already wanted to make. A great example of this from the beer realm is, we've seen a slew of beers from many different breweries over the past few years made with fonio, this regenerative grain from West Africa. When I talk to consumers about why they are interested in fonio, it is always for a new flavor experience, and perhaps they're interested in where the grain comes from and that it's an ingredient from Africa that they hadn't heard of. The sustainability is nice to have there. It is never one of the top reasons that they are excited to try the fonio beer. Again, it supports a decision they already wanted to make. It's not making them choose that beer over something else.
If you want some consistency across your beer trends list on an annual basis, a good bet is to put money down on nostalgia as something that people will point to. It's often framed as consumers will look for a certain brand or aesthetic because they are feeling nostalgic for, whatever it may be, the good old days. The reality here, however, and will be part of upcoming coverage on Sightlines as well, is that at any point of almost any day, certainly every year, that there are aspects of culture that are calling back to things in the past. This is as simple as the cyclical nature of something like fashion that we encounter so often too. The idea that consumers will be making purchase decisions strictly because they feel nostalgic for something in the past in their own life or just broadly in pop culture. Again, with so many options available, the idea of this being a driving piece of how people are spending their money fits well outside of the typical realm of what we see when we think about something like flavor or how people are looking for a particular format of package to fit what they need in the moment.
This one also just feels, I'm going to be mean here. This one just feels lazy to me. Like nostalgia, as in anything that has ever come before. Like, sure, of course. Like some labels look retro, some categories have, some types of drinks have existed before. Guess what? Everything has existed before. There's, very little new under the sun, truly new. So to me, this is just a hand wave at, oh, we're going to see some retro stuff. I don't think that's why, think about a Gen Z consumer choosing a label that looks like it's from, the 70s or something. They're not nostalgic for the 70s. They weren't alive in the 70s. They have no conception of, they have no memory tied to that time. It's a vibe, it's a mood, it's an aesthetic. Okay. That's not real nostalgia. That's aesthetics. And I think the two get conflated very often. And I am just planting my flag in like ban the word nostalgia from trend lists because we're done. We're done here.
Kate, you had a report at the start of 2024 about, I guess, for lack of a better term, the failure of low alcohol beer in the US. We are seeing calls for low ABV beers as a trend for 2025, but we have not seen either anecdotal, qualitative through consumers interest that makes this a category that is going to move in any meaningful way, nor do we see it in the objective quantitative sales data as well. Again, if you're with us on YouTube, you'll see a couple of headlines from early 2024 in which we were asking the question, where's the low and no alcohol beer? And most importantly, do drinkers actually want low ABV beer? Part of that research, Kate, that you did included Miller 64, which is a rebranding of a low cal, low ABV beer from Molson Coors. I have not heard anything about that beer since its launch and PR campaign to start 2024. It sold about 150,000 cases across the entire year, which is roughly the same amount as Budweiser Select. Kate, when we talk about low ABV, do drinkers actually want that?
Drinkers increasingly want no alcohol, completely 0%, under 0.5, or they want high ABV. Especially this gulf between something like 2.5% and 4.5% is a sliver of the market. And not because these products haven't existed. There have been options. There have been, the lower ABV Miller stuff, Radlers and such. People there's a tiny sliver of people who want these. It is not going to set the world on fire. Beer and cider together made up 11% of low alcohol servings in 2023. Low ABV wine and spirits have a much greater share. And again, low alcohol is already a sliver of a sliver, and then beer and cider are just a sliver of that sliver. This is just a very small market because I don't think consumers in the US, there's ample evidence from Europe and other cultures that, embrace the lower ABV thing. It is just not a category that is developing in the US. Consumers don't know when these are for, what these are for. They're choosing to moderate by either not drinking, period, or by alternating between full strength and non-alcoholic products. The US consumer has just not glommed on to these 2.5, 3% beers in a way that's really going to move the needle substantially.
What will move the needle for people? Well, if you join us at sightlines.news, Kate and I will have the kind of insights, context, and analysis that will help you better understand these stories and course correct some of the narratives that are part of them. So join us over at sightlines.news, where we'll have lots more in the coming months about wine, consumer spending, and where you should really be looking for trends in the world of beer and beyond. Until then, thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Brian.